President Trump has signed an executive order that's meant to weaken the legal protections for internet companies. Now, the order was apparently triggered by Twitter's labeling of one of the president's tweets. Twitter attached a fact check to a Trump tweet making unsubstantiated claims about mail-in voting fraud. So Twitter also labeled one of the president's tweets as, quote, glorifying violence. The president has long accused social media companies of bias against conservatives, but this is the most direct action to address it yet. So to talk about the legal implications of this, we want to bring in law professor Rebecca Roiphe. Thank you so much for joining us, Rebecca. We were talking about this executive order a little bit earlier. Is this even legally enforceable?
No, it really isn't. I mean, it's a lot of smoke and not a lot of fire is essentially what it is, because as you said, there are these legal protections for these tech companies. And what the executive order does is seek to roll those back. Particularly, Trump is upset about how these companies can determine what content to allow on or what content to flag as inappropriate. And the thing is that this is based on a law, and you can't, by executive order, reverse or change a law. So that's one of its problems that makes it unenforceable. And the other problem is he's essentially done this by directing an agency to reinterpret the law and through rulemaking. And it's not even clear that he has control over the agency. The agency is an independent agency. So the agency could, in essence, just ignore his directive. And so it is essentially a big proclamation, a message, but a message without a lot of punch.
So it was interesting to watch the president yesterday talking about this, Rebecca, almost in a way. He sort of wink, wink, nodded that he knew that this was going to be a difficult legal challenge, which also then begs the question, why are you doing it? Which, of course, the answer would be it's all politics. But let me just ask you to legally assess this. I mean, would this survive any legal challenges that this executive order, would that survive the legal challenges that would come?
Right. No, I think you have it just right. This is really a political statement more than it is an actual attempt to get something done. There may be important changes that need to happen to this law. It's an incredibly complicated area, but this is not the way to do it. And there are two problems. One is the one I just mentioned, which is you can't change a law by executive order. You can't just, the president can't just say, I don't like this, so I'm going to have my agencies reinterpret it such that they've essentially changed 25 years of court interpretation of a statute. So they can't do that. And second of all, it would probably run into First Amendment, significant First Amendment challenges if it even got there. But there's this doctrine that says courts are really supposed to avoid dealing with constitutional questions, so they'd probably just invalidate any attempt to enforce this on the grounds that it isn't the right way to change this law. You can't, this is not an effective executive order. So that being the case, I think he really must have known that. And instead, it is a statement, and it's a statement that has different audiences. One is his base, and he has long suggested and thought that these platforms and other platforms discriminate against conservatives. So this is him saying, look, you know, a lot of bluster. I'm doing something about this. Nobody else has done anything, and I'm doing something about it. It's also a message to these companies. Now, I don't personally think that these huge tech companies are going to be intimidated by this. And as you said, it already looks like they're not, since they flagged a second tweet from the president after the issuance of the executive order. But that is another audience. He's saying to them, well, watch out. I have tools in my chest and I can come after you. And that, I think, is a little concerning in the way that we've seen this president operate before, which is even when he can't do something, there's power in his words and he tries to use those. I don't think in this particular context it will have much of an effect, but you know, you never know.
So speaking of his words, he said earlier that Section 230 should be revoked by Congress. Can you talk about what Section 230 does, the sort of protections that it offers internet companies, and what, if any, influence over how it's interpreted does the president have?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to say it's a little ironic that he's saying this because Section 230 is essentially what created the possibility of Trump being Trump. It made it possible for him to use a platform like Twitter and say almost whatever he wants. It's really what facilitated the internet as we know it today. So just to get into a little bit more detail, but not to overwhelm anybody, essentially what the law does is it says, look, there's a difference between a publisher and a distributor. And if you're a distributor, you're just allowing people to speak on your platform. You're like City Hall, right? You're just opening your doors. You're providing a microphone, and people can come up and they can say what they want. And that's different. If you're that, then you are not responsible for the things people say. If you give a microphone to somebody and they say something either defamatory or otherwise problematic, you won't be held liable for that. So it makes it such that these companies can be broad platforms for a lot of speech. The thing that bothers the president is that the law also allows these companies to, in good faith, determine what content to allow, what not to allow, what to flag, and what not to flag. And so when Twitter put that little exclamation point there with a fact check connection, that's what bothered him. He said, you are using this in a discriminatory way. The problem with that is that years and years of court decisions have interpreted this law to suggest that these companies have broad latitude in determining what content they want and what they don't. So think about like your website, like CBS. There'll be lots of comments, and CBS can't be held liable if somebody says something that's defamatory on one of those comments. And CBS can also make sure that nobody says anything offensive, doesn't use offensive language, and that sort of thing. And that combination is what allows the internet to be the internet. The thing that he wants to do with this executive order is say, look, if you're not policing this fairly, and we, the government, are going to determine whether you're doing it in good faith, then you lose that liability protection. Then you can suddenly be sued for everything that everybody says on your site. And the problem with that is, if that were actually the law, then the internet as we know it would disappear, because these sites would say, we can't tolerate that level of liability. Therefore, we're not going to, either we're going to have a site that allows everything, and I mean, you can imagine what that would look like, or they're going to say we're going to shut it off entirely and just have our own content. We'll be like a newspaper. So it would be incredibly problematic, and it would be incredibly problematic for Trump himself if 230 were to be repealed. And that isn't to say that it doesn't have problems and it ought not to be tweaked, but it would be hard to just get rid of it at this point, and have the kind of services that we've gotten used to.
Really, really fascinating discussion, Rebecca. And in fact, it dovetails very clearly with some of the comments I've been reading. There's a sort of Twitter war of words happening between Senator Ted Cruz of Texas and Charles C.W. Cook, who's an editor at the National Review, who I'm guessing is a lawyer, because he keeps repeatedly dunking on Senator Cruz, basically using the same arguments that you just made here on our air with regards to content, editorial content, as it relates to newspapers, websites, and the internet. So I urge our viewers to take a look at that if they want a little bit more insight into what we've been talking about, because it really is a fascinating discussion. We appreciate it as always, Rebecca. Thank you.
Nice seeing you.